Welcome to the wide world of punting, where we break down anything and everything in the world of punting. I'm Jacob Wynn. This is episode 16, the last episode of this season for this podcast. So firstly, massive thank you everyone who's got around it the last 4 months. This was just an idea of a new type of punting show. We didn't know how it was going to go, but really appreciate all you guys' support and feedback. This week, I've got a very special guest. I'll announce him in 1 second. We're going to start with the Super Bowl, which obviously finished yesterday, massive punting event. We're going to talk a bit of Tom Brady, the GOAT. We're going to find out all about my guest, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Then I'll bring it home with Tristan, behind bookie lines, and possibly the last ever wide world bet of the week. But it would only be fitting that on the final episode of this season, we start with the man who was here at the beginning of this season, dramatically exited the show after episode 4, but this was also after 6 years working together to build the foundation that is the tripod. Ladies and gentlemen, ALEXI PODOWSKI.
Jacob Wynn, how are you, buddy? Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, mate.
On. And I just want to say, I may be gone, but I do like that you've kept a little bit of the legacy and you've kept my intro that I took about 2 hours to come up with, everything and anything in the world of punting. Love it.
You know, that was actually my first question. It's everything and anything. I always say anything and everything. I've butchered your intro. I have not kept the legacy alive. But you know what? That is just one of like hundreds of little things. It's only once you're gone that I realize, oh shit, like Alex did all these things and did them well. And, you know, I don't want to say since you've gone that I'm all on my own. Shout out Jeff, shout out Dan. You know how much support those boys give me. But mate, like I appreciate you even more now that you're gone, just thinking about like all the things that you used to have to put up with every week.
And I'm glad to not be doing them anymore, because there are a lot of like little stuff that happens behind the scenes and stuff, as you know now. But to be honest, you've done a good job. Like the graphics have suddenly gotten better. And to be like, this is what, week 16 of the wide world of punting. And I'd be a number of rungs down the ladder of people that you've gotten on. You've gotten some absolute cracking guests on, which is great.
Well, you know, with the graphics, mate, I've explained that to people. That's like when the wife gets left by her husband for, you know, a better, more attractive secretary. Right. And then you got to get the facelift. You got to get the boob job to try and get your confidence back. And look, the listeners are going to want to know. And, you know, you've put yourself down there saying you're not the biggest guest on the show. I'm sure everyone's excited. And I'm sure everyone wants to know, you know, all about how you're going. We will get to that. But let's start with the Super Bowl. Let's pretend like nothing's changed. And let's just chat about the Super Bowl as if you're part of the pod, mate. Like 3-0 on best bets. 57% for the NFL season. Congrats to you, because you were with me for the first half. And I really don't think people understand 57% on the toughest sport to handicap, the most scrutinized in the world, I'd say, is extremely good achievement as well.
Definitely, mate. And even I've seen like some people giving you some crap over the tips, but 3-0, I mean, you've kept it going for sure. But what a Super Bowl. And I mean, like, I know I've seen a lot of people kind of talking afterwards, like, oh, you never bet against the GOAT. And you kind of knew those comments were going to, you know, filter through afterwards. Everyone's a hindsight hero. But, like, I can safely say that I didn't, and I'm sure you didn't see the Super Bowl going that way. I know a lot of people kind of, you know, watch the game and in hindsight say, well, we didn't consider, you never betting against Brady. Didn't consider all those O-line injuries, which you did, obviously. People just kind of said, you know, Mahomes is going to be too good. But you could kind of see, especially second half, you're just used to seeing Mahomes being down double digits, coming back. You're never kind of worried. But in this one, it was just completely different. That O-line could not stop him. That Bucs defense was getting to him. And the mobility of Mahomes, you know, obviously now it's come out that he's probably going to have to get surgery in the offseason. But those are all huge factors that I guess, you know, a lot of people overlooked.
And look, I did highlight that in the pod that's what kept me off the Chiefs. It was my number one factor that I couldn't trust the O-line against that nasty Bucs defense. And that's why my 3 best bets were a big reason why the 3 best bets were all on unders. I think it turned out even uglier than anyone anticipated. But you said it there, is mobility, right? Like what people don't understand is you don't need a great offensive line if you're a naturally evasive quarterback that can still be comfortable in the pocket, can still make people miss, can still, you know, get around, turn the corner and then make plays. You and I actually watched half the game together and we noticed like he could barely outrun JPP. Like he was not himself. And I think people equate Pat Mahomes' health to his rushing stats. So, he still rushed over 30 yards. He went over. So don't tell me he was injured. Quarter. Yes, it was all early, and they were forced runs. He was running for his life. He was never comfortable. I think people just don't realize he was a step slower than what he normally is. And that made it made all the difference.
Yeah, I'm happy for all those guys on the Bucks because honestly, like you heard it, like this is the biggest day of their life. They were so hungry for it, and you could tell that they all just love Brady so much. He's honestly just changed the culture there. They've had a culture of just losing and being mediocre teams for ages, and it was good to see.
You can't fault Brady. It seems like even in a win, people want to take stuff away from him. What about the fact that it was all the recruits who scored? So Gronk, Antonio Brown, Leonard Fournette, Brady himself was like, these guys, everyone would have said their best years are behind them coming into this season. They are responsible for all the touchdowns in the Super Bowl. And from a betting perspective, it's interesting. And maybe you can shed a light because you do work for the other side. Like those are all quite popular names who all scored anytime touchdowns. It was the GOAT. His team was paying like $2.50 to win. Did you notice that there was more money? Like, can you talk about the liability that Ladbrokes and Neds had on both the futures and on this game itself?
Look, I'll take you back to before the playoffs started, wildcard weekend. I had a look at the liability, and I mean, no surprise really. The Bucks and the Chiefs were the teams that we didn't want to win, and of course, they were the two teams that made the Super Bowl. And the Bucks was the worst outcome for us in terms of a futures perspective, because I just guarantee, everyone was getting on the Bucks as soon as Brady went there. I mean, better than anyone, especially like people in the States or wherever, like they hear Brady's going there, they try and get on. So. That was definitely the worst outcome for us. I think in the head-to-head betting, I guess it's that phenomenon, like you said, with the Super Bowl, people don't look at $1.50 odds and think that looks juicy to me. They think Tom Brady at $2 plus money, let's take that. And, of course, all your average punters come out of the woodwork come Super Bowl time, so not as much hold on the handicap, but yeah, definitely a lot of money on the Bucks straight up, and especially in that futures market as well. I think one bloke I think had like 35 grand on the Bucks at like $9, so he's done all right out of that.
And the man on the street isn't going to win every Super Bowl with that kind of basic handicap. But hey, congratulations to anyone who was on Tampa Bay, because nobody in the world can make an argument that it wasn't a great bet. They were clearly too good. You touched on Tom Brady, so let's kind of wrap the Super Bowl talking about him. When he first went to Tampa Bay, he had options, including potentially even staying in New England. I'll be honest, my very first reaction is he that much better than Jameis Winston, who was the quarterback on that team when they went 7-9 last year? So it's going to improve that position. But it's like you said, the culture. So he walks into the clubhouse. He's the walking GOAT. Most players on the team grew up watching him win Super Bowls. There's like that ultimate respect level. There's no longer any mucking around. You're instilled like this culture, mentality, confidence throughout 53 men in the roster and the staff that like now we're going to do what it takes to win. And I think clearly there was already a lot of talent on this Bucks team. And if you're going to give Brady credit, one thing you give him credit for is identifying that. It was a very, smart place to go because they had all this potential. But he brought it out of them. They might have been lacking maturity, cohesion. So you got to give him credit beyond his play at the position, but just how much he impacted the squad.
For sure. And not only the Super Bowl, like this would have been happening all season long, but you hear the stories come out now, like, Brady sort of mentoring Godwin one-on-one, and he's been to this many Super Bowls, 10 Super Bowls. He knows how it works.
And you know what? The other thought I had was when Brady left New England, it was a risk because this was the first time we got a separation between Tom Brady and Coach Belichick after 20 years where there was an ongoing debate of who was more important, who was more responsible. And I thought the reason it was a risk for Brady was that if he failed, and especially, let's say, if the Pats did well this season, all the haters would have said, well, that proves he wasn't great, which would have been totally unfair because he's 43. Like, he didn't have to succeed this season to prove how good he was the last 20 years. But never mind that worry that I had, because he did succeed. And that's what we got to remember is truly insane. Not even by NFL standards, which it is, but in world sport. To be, performing on that level. He's 43 years old and he's not showing any signs of stopping either. All right, that's enough about the NFL, mate. Like, in general, can I ask you, just how's life going? How you been?
It's good, mate. It's good. And I know we don't talk to each other as much anymore, but like you said, we watched the second half of the Super Bowl together yesterday, and for all the listeners out there, we are obviously still friends. I know people out there will probably think that, we had a messy breakup, but it's not like that. Jacob has moved on, and as you can see with the pod, he's on to bigger and better things.
I asked you, you're working for a bookie now, like, how do you sleep at night? And you said, I don't sleep at night, but that's actually not a conscious thing, but that is now. You are on night shift working for, and just to make it clear, you work for GVC, who own Ladbrokes and Neds, and I want to ask about that relationship in a second. But just talk about the adjustment. So you've talked about this before, like the last couple of years doing the pod full time, but also like doing early morning Uber shifts and stuff like that to be able to make a living. So now in a way you've got more or less freedom because you've got your set shifts, but you've got more freedom because it's not like the 24/7 nature of running the pod. So how have you found it?
That is the difference, isn't it? Like, I mean, you know better than anyone, but it's like the pod, obviously, you can kind of make your own hours when you're going to put the work in. And, you know, obviously some days are much busier than others. Like our Wednesday, obviously super busy after team list for the NRL and stuff like that. But it is nice not having to have your phone on you all the time and have to worry about answering, you know, messages and emails and that sort of stuff. But yeah, nights was an interesting transition. I've never sort of worked night shifts apart from, as you'd remember, I was a bartender at the Regatta for a couple of years, and I'd get done about 3 a.m. But the hardest transition, I guess, was just getting enough sleep. And now that I'm kind of used to it, I've been there for a couple of months now, it's gotten a little bit easier. And now I've got some aircon. I finally had aircon installed in my bedroom, which has helped a lot. Because honestly, like, you know, just getting a decent, like, 6 hours sleep during the day makes the world of difference. Like those first couple of weeks, I was not getting enough sleep, and you kind of feel yourself kind of getting a bit foggy during the night. But now it's all right. So as you can't tell, but as you know, I've come off my shift now. I haven't slept yet. I'm going to chat to you, and then I'm going to hop in bed and have a nap.
That's it. We appreciate we're keeping you up. But yeah, like especially for you starting night shift right in the middle of a Queensland summer, and then having to learn to sleep in the day with obviously the light and the heat and stuff like that would have been a challenge. So good to hear.
Indeed.
You got some aircon in there, mate. Now, I mentioned the fact that, like, to make it quite clear that your employer, I suppose, is GVC, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong with that, right? So I'm interested, like, actually there's even rumours, and they own Lads and Neds, there's even rumours they're looking at taking over Tabcorp, which would be interesting too. But is there any distinction to you when you walk in there? Are you doing some tasks for Neds as opposed to Ladbrokes? Are there staff members who work for one or the other? Or is it just like one business that just happens to have two shop fronts at this point?
It's basically, from my standpoint anyway, it's just all one and the same. So, I've got my screen set up, and there's bets coming through from, Lads, Neds, and the other two, Bookmaker and Betstar. So they're all coming in together. So there's not really any difference whatsoever from my point of view. And they kind of amalgamated it all. Like they used to have, well before my time, but they used to have a separate Neds office. They used to have a separate Ladbrokes office. Now it's all just one and the same now.
And can you give a glimpse into the kind of daily activities, kind of things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I started off at nights, and it's kind of interesting now because, we've got NBA in full swing. You obviously had the NFL and stuff like that. So, I mean, all the day shift guys kind of get most of the work done. And there's some absolute fucking geniuses in there, like guys that, write all the code for the same game multis, all the algorithms, all that kind of stuff. And then it's kind of more just maintaining stuff at night. So, I mean, generally we'll have 2 or 3 night shift guys on. Usually you'll focus on either racing or sports. I'm obviously more sports based, but I'll, throw in a racing shift every now and then. But, I mean, for your sake, you're probably more interested in the sports side of things. So, I mean, you get in and obviously if any of the customer service stuff gets escalated to the traders, then I'll take care of that. You're accepting any bets that obviously get referred. You'd know better than anyone. Sometimes you'll put a bet on, it'll get referred and either accepted, partialed or rejected or whatnot. So I take care of that kind of stuff. And then just generally just making sure, all the odds are sort of in line, moving odds depending on, if we're getting some sharp action or whatnot. And especially with the American sports, a lot of that kind of stuff, all the personnel news and stuff is happening in the middle of the night. Like you're getting like NFL at 3:00 in the morning. You're getting team news, an hour and a half before the game time. And if there's a starting running back out or whatever, which obviously happens, then, you've got to see that alert and then obviously, either pull it or, move them pretty quick. And now, especially with like NBA COVID and stuff, like, there's outs all the time. So, I mean, like even just like last night, like you got John Wall resting, like Westbrook out, like all this kind of stuff where, that hits there, and you've got bets coming through, obviously, from sharp guys that are like, oh shit, better get on. So adjusting that kind of stuff on the fly. So it is, it's definitely interesting.
Is there anything like that surprised you? Something that either you have to do or they do that you just never realized like that was the way bookies operated?
Oh, a little bit. I mean, all of it's kind of been like new to me and like wrapping my head around that kind of stuff. A lot more stuff sort of happens manually than I would have realized. I guess a lot of resulting stuff and, kind of, all the stuff when a game finishes and, like player props and all that kind of thing. Like a lot of it is auto, but like a lot of it, more than I would have thought, is actually manually done. And I mean, surprised me. I mean, we get a lot of our odds and stuff from either like Ladbrokes UK or whatever, or like an American feed provider or whatnot. But it did surprise me how much stuff they actually do in-house. Like they do all their own NRL stuff, all their own AFL stuff, which, obviously is like crazy hard to not only put up all the props and stuff like that, but also like build the algorithms for the same game multis and all that kind of shit. So, a ton of stuff that they actually do in-house. And it is like, it's a massive office. I mean, the general setup is you got your 4 screens, and then you've got, a row of TVs at the top.
Like your 4 personal screens or 4 screens? Like each person has a 4 monitors?
Yeah, pretty much. And then you've just got whatever you want on the TVs, and you just kind of flick through the channels depending on what the most sort of relevant sport is on, at that time that you need to kind of be watching in case, people are making bets at key times in like a soccer match or something like that. So, you just kind of make sure you have at least the 2 Sky Racing channels and all the sport on and stuff like that.
Keep an eye on the Swedish trots overnight, mate. Make sure that you don't let anyone bet once the race has already started.
Well, the funny thing is, like, so I do a little bit of racing, not like max racing, but I mean, like, most of that kind of stuff is pretty automated in the middle of the night. Like, we'll get closed signals from the feed provider, which says, like, that's when the race closed, no more betting. But sometimes it stopped, and it was one of the first nights that I'd actually started, the first nights that I'd gone in and kind of was by myself, not doing my training. And of course, like one of those first nights at about 5 a.m., I think the feed provider just like went down basically. So we weren't getting any closed signals for any of the races. They were just staying open. So we had to manually close them all. And you've got to have vision because like you don't have Sky Racing at 5 a.m. in the morning. So you've got to have like Betfair up to be looking at like all the races and the dog races, see where they're closing. Then you've got to have your like Swedish trot stream on and see when that's closing. So that was pretty interesting last 2 hours of the shift.
And full-on question for you now, mate, because
righto.
We understand that it was a really tough decision for you to leave, and you've talked about how you've been there for 2 or 3 months now. So, like at this point in time, can I ask, like, do you still feel good about it? Do you feel you made the right one?
I do. Yeah, I really enjoy the work, and this is no knock on the pod. Obviously, I loved doing the pod, but yeah, I really enjoy the work. I don't regret leaving, and I think part of it also is not only because I do enjoy the work there, but also because, as you know, and as you've explained to the followers and stuff like that, like, we put in a shitload of hours into the pod. It was a full-time job basically, where you had to still be working like in the middle of the night, getting messages and stuff like that. But like you've said, it wasn't a full-time wage. At first, it was definitely tricky to wrap my head around. I know we've sort of been punters for like 12 years and we know all the ins and outs of it, but it's more of the tech side, all the programs that you have to get used to and stuff like that. But now that I'm used to that, it is, it makes it a lot easier, and it's fun at night. Like once you wrap your head around the programs and all that kind of stuff, it lets you kind of dig in, and then you have time to like look at these odds, compare them to others, make sure you're right, go through all the bets that are coming through, look at all the injuries that are popping up. So it does make it, a little bit easier once you're used to it. And, I don't know if I could do like night shift for 10 years, but like for now anyway, like it is pretty nice. Like, I get 4 days on, 3 days off, which is not too bad. I'm getting used to sleeping in the day a little bit more. Don't have to drive in traffic, which is kind of nice. So, we'll see though. But could definitely see myself doing it for a while.
That's really good to hear. But you said you still did enjoy working for the pod. So is there anything that you
Certainly did.
miss?
Definitely miss like full deep diving into the games, because like it's not. I don't have enough time to do that now, and I mean like, because we struggle to bet ourselves. and have done for quite some time. I mean, that was the fun part about like digging in, finding winning plays, and actually sharing with the followers, because I wouldn't do that now anymore. Like I wouldn't spend 5 hours on a Wednesday after NRL, team lists come out trying to find best bets, because like one, I'd probably be sleeping, and like two, I can't even get on them myself, So digging in like that and doing the research was always fun. And obviously, like all the blokes in the pod that, some of them are obviously like Jeff and Dan and those blokes, like I still chat to every now and then, but certainly miss like a little bit of the camaraderie in the group. And I'm in there occasionally, but obviously not as much as I used to.
And what about anything you are relieved to not have to do anymore? Any things you don't miss? And you can say you don't miss talking to me every day, but is there any things that you just like kick back and think, oh, I'm so glad I don't, deal with that anymore?
It is nice. And I think you might have mentioned this as well. When I initially told you I was actually leaving, you said it's probably going to be nice to actually switch off for a little bit sometimes. And that is probably, one of the things that is a bit nicer. Like I can switch off in my downtime pretty much. Where else, when I was doing the pod, like you'd have to kind of have your phone on you almost 24/7. So that's one thing that is certainly nice. I can like, kind of have a day on my day off. Like we go to the coast or whatever, and I'll leave my phone in the car. It won't even bother me. I'm not going to be like missing out on something crazy that's happening.
And then I was also wondering, like your experience watching the games, like you don't have that pressure of coming up with plays, but you also don't. That must be nice watching a game and not having like something on the line every single time. Have you like watched less? Have you enjoyed watching the games less or more?
It is nice to watch a game and not have a pun on. Like, you're watching NBA games and whatnot, and it's coming down to, whether it's going to go to overtime, like last bucket, and, you're just watching it for the fun of it. Like, even the Super Bowl yesterday, like, I can't remember a time where I, like, basically had no money on the Super Bowl. I remember times where I'd have, like, 30 to 40 prop bets on, and I've got a sheet, like, I've got my piece of paper there, looking at everyone, trying to tick them off or cross them off when they happen. So, yeah, kind of nice to just watch it and actually enjoy the game.
You'll probably live longer than me, to be honest. And the future logo will probably be like my hair will all be gone or grey and I'll be all wrinkled, and you'll probably look the same in 20 years.
I had a bet on the Wide World Bet of the Week, so that unfortunately didn't get up. Thanks very much for that, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, mate. Yeah, it's been much maligned. But at least,
like, honestly, like you're treading water with those, and you've done very well in the playoffs, best bet wise. So I mean, yeah, people are going to complain, aren't they?
And I've said this before as well. You've absolutely stitched me up in leaving after the 2020 NRL season where we went 63%. Sorry, it kicks off next month. And I won't lie, I'm a tiny bit nervous. Not just about like having to find all the players of mine, not having someone else to compare with. Because another thing people might not understand is if we did all our handicapping independently. So if myself, like 58% of the time, I find a winner. And if you're the same, you win 58% of the time. But then if we always cancelled out the plays that were clashing, we're probably weeding out, our weaker plays. And together we can come up with plays that win 60+% of the time. I don't have the luxury of doing that. But have they told you at all on your side of things? Are you going to be very involved in the NRL side of operations this season?
Look, probably not a hell of a lot. I would like to get into the NRL side of things a little bit, and I think I will, sort of transition into that kind of stuff. But there are the guys that deal with the NRL and the AFL, and they've been doing it for years. They're like basically experts on the stuff. And, when you build all the NRL and AFL kind of stuff, it's always during the day. So, I mean, like my shift starts at 9:00. So it's like the NRL games are basically over at that time. But they've got their guys in there that, will trade the AFL and they'll trade the NRL live in the office or at home or whatnot. So I'm sure I'll be doing a little bit of NRL, but, not as much as I was doing with the pod, that's for sure.
Well, that's actually a relief to me. I think a relief to listeners that you may not be fully hands-on, because I'm worried about, like, am I still going to be able to find a lot of good bets on Neds and Lads that are still going to be up when the pod goes live, and you're going to know exactly, like, when that is. But that's good to know. You're going to be doing night shifts, so you can't get us there. And I just say to whoever your colleagues are, set your odds and then let the boys play.
I just know, and as well, as soon as Cam Smith decides where he's going, people will be plunging on that. I have seen a little bit of interest for the Titans to win the premiership already. A lot of interest for the Doggies as well at 51-1. So a number of 5-figure bets come in on the Doggies
to win the comp.
At $51, which I don't necessarily agree with, but they were
Well,
some
you
of the
hate the
larger ones
Bulldogs.
that I've seen. And yeah,
Jesus.
I know. Yeah,
Win the comp is optimistic. Jeez, I think that money's going to be going straight towards your Christmas party for this year, to be honest. But I haven't done my own full deep dive. I'm going to be back. This is the last pod people are going to see from me for 3 weeks at this point. My plan is to be back.
You need a break.
Yeah, and it will be nice to have a little break. Although the All-Stars game coming up as well, I'll probably have to put a tip out for that. But yeah, NRL preview pods in 3 weeks if anyone's interested. But look, I really appreciate your time today, mate. I'll let you go, let you get some sleep. We talked for way longer than I told you we were going to talk for. But look, obviously, wish you the best. Even though, like when I said when you left, and I say the same thing now, like you're welcome to come back, but wish you the best. And I genuinely believe like it's good to have smart, innovative people who understand punters working for the bookies as well, because we want the best products, and the most creative products that can be delivered to punters. So look, all the best again, and hopefully we can check in again with you at some point during the footy season.
Appreciate it, mate. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll chat again for sure. Good to talk to you again. Good to be on the pod again.
Great to catch up with ALEXI there, hear that he's doing well, and give you guys a bit more of an understanding of exactly what the job that he's taken up involves. And now I've got the final segment of Behind Bookie Lines on the final episode, of course, with Tristan from Top Sport. We're going to actually look ahead to my favourite topic of all, which is the Rugby League NRL season 2021. Tristan giving his insights so far on who've been the movers and shakers, which teams are trending up, which teams are trending down, including some big bets on some very unlikely teams. And we actually begin this chat with a quick snapshot of the Super Bowl from the bookie perspective again, where they took the biggest bets, where they had their biggest wins and their biggest losses.
Yeah, we had a winning result, which I'm sure the punters don't like hearing all the time. But we were standing Kansas for quite a bit in the lead up to the match, and then as we discussed last week, you've then got to make your decision. Do you try to put Kansas in again, or do you try to sort of balance the book up a little bit? We sort of took that opinion where we decided to really try to lay Kansas again on the day, so we were betting quite an aggressive price about them. And not that we obviously thought Tampa were going to do what they were going to do, or we just felt that we were in that sort of position where we didn't want to put ourselves in a spot where we were probably going to have a losing result on both teams. So it was fortunate the way it worked out. There was a lot of money on Kansas head-to-head. Originally, we laid some sort of sharpish action on the Tampa Plus, which is sort of sometimes you never really know if someone's had a good crack at Kansas to win the Super Bowl and they're laying off and doing those sort of things to get in the middle. So it's a difficult one to adjudicate from our end how we sort of treat that sort of money. But that was our biggest single bet in the book, where someone had 50,000 on Tampa Plus. So then we were pushing the minus quite aggressively to try to balance that out and again to go with the situation. I just didn't want to leave ourselves in a spot where we were going to have an ugly 1-3 Kansas. So I thought we were in that spot there that we had to really do our best to be aggressive laying the minus, and fortunately enough we did. There was also a lot of activity on the overs, which, the way the game panned out, we were probably a little bit fortunate there. I sort of thought once Tampa jumped out to that big lead, we might have been in a little bit of trouble there, but the running game was very strong at the end by Tampa. But we took a lot of different bets. I've never seen so many individual bets into a whole heap of different markets. It was certainly a real eye-opener for us. So whilst we had a good result on the match itself, there were a lot of the prop bets where we did cop a bit of a pasting on, like we laid Brady very heavily for the MVP. The couple of those novelty markets we probably overcommitted on a little bit, where the link for the national anthem, which appeared to get leaked earlier in the week, we laid that from $2.20 all the way into $1.10. So these sort of things where there's just not much you can do. The first song, that's where we spoke a few weeks ago about those sort of markets where the information can be leaked, and it was probably one of those ones where we handled it as well as we could, but it was just one-way traffic. And I guess now with a larger client base and what we've had in previous years, those numbers do creep up even when you are shortening the bet every time you lay one. It's amazing how when it's just one-way traffic for one option, you do end up sort of standing it for a bit more than what you would normally, I suppose.
Now, you gave us quite an interesting insight a week ago, and I want to clarify this because you talked about you've got a lot of sharp clients, and you anticipated that your sharp clients would be on Tampa Bay, and then you said, but, we've got some recreational punters too who will play Kansas, and I thought that was interesting at the time. You were basically saying the sharp side was Tampa, the public side was Kansas City. But I wasn't necessarily convinced if that would be true because there's so many people love Brady and because people love to play the plus, the $2.50 in a head-to-head just because, they're getting that better return. I envisioned that the public would be more on Tampa Bay. So can you just clarify how that ended up panning out with the head-to-head bets?
Yeah, well, it's probably, you certainly are right in that respect. There's so much love for Brady out there. And I guess that's probably for us where we had an ordinary result on the MVP. So maybe it was a case of, I think we were betting $3.10 about Brady to get the MVP and they were $2.40. So I really think anyone who thought Tampa were going to win probably thought Brady was going to get the MVP. So a lot of people gravitated to that market as opposed to the match itself. So that was one aspect of it. One of the real popular markets, which had me a little bit nervous at some points, was the Tampa first half into Kansas full-time result. And that was quite a sizable dividend, but we just took a lot of action on that from a whole heap of different people. And at halftime, even though I sort of felt quite comfortable at that point, you can never count someone like Mahomes out. And I was thinking, geez, this could get pretty ugly if they do come back and win because we're already committed to Kansas. And then if they win at this big price as well, it's going to hurt. But we dodged that. But to answer your question, there was a lot of recreational money on Tampa, but the bigger recreational money for us was on the Kansas side.
I could see you being nervous because I think it was 14-3 with the Chiefs driving. It was the Chiefs with the ball with a minute to go. They settled for only 3, and then it was Tampa Bay that then got in for 7 more before halftime. So you had a 15-point deficit when it could have been more like a 4-point deficit. And regarding MVP, usually it is the quarterback. I suppose we were talking during the game, like Gronkowski had the 2 first touchdown catches, and Brady didn't have a heap of yards. But I think throwing that extra touchdown to Antonio Brown and the fact Gronk didn't, have a massive second half, it was a very deserving winner. And like the other thing about who was the public side, maybe it just wasn't obvious in this case because they're both very, high profile, beloved teams. You had the Super Bowl defending champs against, a guy that's won it 6 times already. So it's not as if Buffalo had got in there against the Bucs and then it'd be very clear who the public would side on. But as we kind of move past that big game, now that concludes like what was a pretty impressive NFL season, and impressive in the sense that they got every game in without one cancellation. I kind of exhale myself a little bit, but now I turn my attention fully to the NRL, and I'm sure your office is going to start gearing up and doing the same because I know you guys love the NFL and the NRL and pride yourselves on bookmaking for that and taking large action on that. So we'll start the discussion, and I'll just preface it by saying I have not done my own deep dive on the NRL, so I'm more curious just on your early thoughts, but based on how these teams have changed as we move into season 2021. There's been a couple of coaching changes. There's been big players, joining and leaving teams. And you guys have already got odds up for round 1. So could you give us an idea of like which teams have like a stronger power rating? Let's start there. Which teams you think have improved prospects for 2021?
Yeah, well, I think the big flashing light team from the back end of last year and into this year is the Titans. They've signed really, really well. They're playing some really good football the back end of the year. So I think it's the first time in a long time they'll be sub $2 to make the top 8. So there's been some good support there. And obviously you got the other little bit of uncertainty surrounding Cameron Smith as well at the moment. So it's sort of, you hear a different story every day, but it's probably looking more likely than not that he probably will line up for the Titans. He's obviously bought a house up here and, he doesn't do a lot of preseason training anyway, as far as I'm heard. So we're probably got that inkling that he will sign and then there probably will be a little bit more downward pressure on the Titans price. But they're $15 to win the title at the moment and they've been very well supported. And for us, they'd be the biggest mover and shaker in terms of the market. They've signed well. They've got a lot of momentum. Their coaching staff looks to be on the up. So for us, they're the biggest movers in the power rankings at our end. The one that's probably also a really strong mover up the top of that premiership betting is South. They've signed really well. They haven't lost a whole heap of players at the moment, and they look like they were sort of working into a bit of form there late as well. So you feel they might have just added a couple of pieces to the puzzle to really make them genuine contenders this year, and they are. What have we got here? I think they're right up there in the top of the market. Yeah, they're $6 second favourite to win the title. So again, they would be one of the bigger movements. Penrith's very solid there at the top of the board, unsurprisingly on the back of last year, and the Roosters, as always, and the Storm, as always, are up there too. But South, I think, were maybe $8 or $9 this time last year, and they're into a clear second pick or equal second pick. And they do look to have a very solid team, and they've signed well. So they're the two biggest moves in our view in terms of the improvement of the roster. One of the big ones that has moved and there has been support from outside of last year's 8 is Manly, and they've signed okay. They've signed obviously Kieran Foran, which might be positive at some points throughout the year. They've had that really swap with a couple of props there, but probably it's almost like a new signing, getting Tommy Trbojevic back into the side, whereas it's not a signing, but someone or a key player that misses such a big chunk of the season. If you feel that he's going to get back into some of the form that he was in years gone by, we know he's got a massive injury cloud that always seems to hang over his head, but that's been another solid move on the back of where they were sort of positioned this time last year as well. So there's been a couple of moves also at odds for the Bulldogs. We've taken some really sizable bets on them. Someone's had 5,000 on them at $67. So they've firmed all the way into 26, which I personally can't see them challenging for the title, but you never know. And I think there was sort of a few little rumblings there at some point earlier in this, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they were going to make another couple of decent signings, which all of a sudden would have put them into that sort of space. But I think they're going to be an improving side. I think over the coming period, they're going to be well. There's obviously a lot of support in the marketplace for them. So if you have any inkling on the Bulldogs and you think they can make the top 8, then the marketplace is suggesting that they're going to improve this year. So that's the thing. You've always got to look at these improving teams. Are they improving in the chance that they can win the premiership, or are they improving that they can make the top 8 or the top 4 and these sort of things? So whilst there's always got to be improvers, there's got to be a few teams on the decline and the slippery slope a little bit as well. So probably the Knights have been one of the biggest drifters compared to last year. Last year at this time, they had a real boom on them and everyone really expected them to go to that next level, and they started the season really well. Like they were, I think, up there near the top of the ladder and after the first 6 or 7 weeks, and then they sort of dropped off over that origin period. And then unfortunately the decline continued. And I don't think they've lost a whole heap of players. They've lost a couple of bits and pieces here and there, but I think probably their fall from grace is on the back of their ordinary run home last year, and also the off season that probably hasn't been as good as what they would have hoped. So they're definitely one of the teams dropping off a bit. From a roster point of view, Canberra, I think, are probably one of those teams up the top of the board that we've dropped down our power rankings a little bit. They've lost, obviously, Nick Kotrick and John Bateman, who were very key last year. So they have fallen down the pecking order a little bit. This time last year, they were right up there, obviously losing that grand final, and they'd signed a few players which looked as though they were going to be really, really tough to beat. So there's still a genuine chance. They've still got some impact players there, and we know Josh Hodgson's so instrumental, and he's back after an injury as well. So there's a whole heap of different ways to look at it, but they probably have dropped off a little bit. And the Warriors, they're a funny one because you look at their team on paper, and I know there's the uncertainty with Roger Tuivasa-Sheck now, but I've got that feeling he's a sort of bloke that he's made this decision now, so it just takes the pressure off, and he's going to give his 110% this year. And you look at the team on paper, they look pretty good, and they had a really good run last year, but I think the drop in the pricing or the decrease in the power rankings is more so that we know now that they're going to be playing every game in Australia, where at the start of last year we obviously had no inkling of that at all. So they're probably the biggest moves both ways at our end. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the back of some of those sort of things that I've discussed, because I very much value your opinion on the rugby league, and I know you probably don't want to give too much away when you haven't looked into it too deeply, but like that's sort of where our marketplace is sort of sitting at the moment, where our market position is sitting at the moment.
No, that's a really good snapshot. Well, my really base thoughts on everything you've said. I mean, you've said Titans, but my problem is the secret's out. Like, I agree Titans are going to be much better this year. The trick is everybody knows that. And, even if they don't get Smith, they're going to be pushing top 8. And if they do get Smith, absolutely, they'd have, top 8, if not beyond prospects. So that's going to be the challenge is identifying how much better. You mentioned Manly, and I'd be really interested to get this information from you, maybe not today, but, in future pods. I've got like Tom Trbojevic. Like, if you bet on them for the season, you're betting that he stays healthy for the whole season. But in any one game, if he's in, he's got to be one of the most valuable players to the point spread in the whole competition. And you mentioned how you power rate teams and you power rate key players. I'd love to hear what your assessment of value over replacement is for a guy like Tom Trbojevic, because it seems like every game he's in, they score at least one extra try, and he's usually saving a try as well. Souths, that's fairly obvious as well because of the trend line, and they did it without Latrell Mitchell. They've signed Jai Arrow, so I absolutely see them as contenders. Bulldogs, you're the second person on this podcast to tell me there's been big bets on futures for the Bulldogs, and Alex told me the same, and I said, geez, people putting thousands on Bulldogs to win the comp are funding your Christmas party, honestly, like in my mind, but I haven't done my deep dive. I don't know if it's the speculation that Matt Burton gets released a year early from Penrith, and then he's a legit, young stud to add to the other signings you've mentioned. As for drop-offs, that's the thing. There have to be drop-offs as well. The Knights is a funny one because you'd actually say net that the roster would be stronger adding a guy like Tyson Frizzell. There could be some disgruntled players and a lack of harmony. So that's the team I'd watch closely in early rounds. And New Zealand, I tend to think that they should go well, really, just showing the resilience they did last year. And they had players that went home early. And, I'm not so concerned about Roger because I think he will give the club everything. I think they respect his decision. So they're another team that I think could have a positive year. But yeah, I say this every year. I go in and do my deep dive, and I usually find about 12 or 13 teams I think should make the 8. And then it just becomes so hard. It's actually the real trick is finding 8 teams that won't make it because and even if you look last year, you can make a good case for everybody who did make the 8 last year will be pretty good again. But there's also plenty knocking on the door.
It's an exciting season. I'm looking at the teams down the bottom of the board, and you haven't got that team that's just legless. I know the Dragons didn't go that well last year, but on paper they still don't have the worst outfit. Cowboys at $34 with the inclusion of Payton as well, and obviously Morgan coming back from that injury, you expect them to improve. So there's a lot of teams there that, I as you say, it's going to be hard to pencil or to put a line through 8 teams that are going to miss the 8 because it does look a very, very competitive season this year.
And then on top of that, let's mention the other Queensland team that had a lot of culture issues last year, but now has a new regime as well. So how quickly does Kevy, turn around the attitudes? Because there is a bit of talent, in Brisbane. They always, have a decent roster. Their problems weren't so much talent-based last year as a lot of other things. But then again, you lost Fafita. Katoni Staggs is injured. He's going to be coming back off an ACL, which he did in the final round. And then now Payne Haas suspended as well. So it's not the start that they want in terms of utilising their personnel, but it's another team that will be interesting to keep an eye on. And I think it's never really been as simple as finding a team before round 1 that you can ride all season long. Usually if you can identify 1 or 2 strong teams to play, you get them for a handful of rounds in a row if you're lucky. And then the secret gets out that they're a good footy team. And then at some point that you may end up finding you're betting against the hot team because they've become overvalued. So it's also not all about trying to pick who's going to finish higher on the ladder at the end of the year. It's trying to pick who's good right now in any given week. But thank you, I've got to say, of course, for the last 12 weeks. You came on board, I think, a month into the series of Wild World of Punting to come on and do Behind Bookie line segment with me every week and share a ton of insight. I really think, unlike any CEO of a bookmaker has so publicly before, and I really appreciate how much you've been able to share and how candid you've been along the way. And I know a lot of the audience has as well. So I really want to thank you for that, as well as supporting the show.
I appreciate that. And I really enjoy the relationship we build. Hopefully we have given a bit of insight to the listeners out there and they've picked up some tips. As we touched on earlier in the year, I love this game and I want people to enjoy it and understand it and to find a way to be able to punt better. We want people to enjoy the punt, stay engaged, and it's so key to try to explain things that we can and make people understand, that there is a lot that goes into it, a lot from both sides that goes into it. There's so much work you put in each week. So, I really appreciate you having us on as a partner for this show. I'm glad, you've enjoyed it. I'm glad a lot of the listeners have, and hopefully it'll, be bigger and better as we move forward.
Thanks again to Tristan, because I'll be honest with you guys, when I brought Top Sport on board, I was reluctant to give up any portion of the show at all for a sponsored segment. I never would have done it if I thought it would take away from the show. But I think you guys would agree that my weekly chat with Tristan has actually been one of the real great aspects of the whole series. Wide World of Wet of the Week time, and that includes a season summary. So here we go. So last week, the Super Bowl bingo, which I was really bullish on, and I laid out the case where I thought really was a strong play. It lost. And the biggest reason, just not foreseeing that type of blowout, losing the prop, like largest lead to exceed 16.5 points. And the funny thing is, when you play a bet like that and you take like under on largest lead and unders, that's usually a vote of confidence for the underdog in the Bucks to make it a good game. That also took away a lot of opportunities for the game to ever be tied. And even after all that, we got our field goal prop, we got our 4th down conversion. We just needed a 2-point attempt. And with the Chiefs trailing in the second half by 15, at one stage 19, very late by 22, if they would have scored, we would have got a 2-point attempt. But right down to the final play of Pat Mahomes getting a tipped pass intercepted in the end zone, we fell short, only 2 out of 5. We needed 3 out of 5. And what that meant kind of summed up our season, really. That was the 9th loss out of 14. So 5 wins, all plus money odds. But still, if you've, had $100 on 14 times, you've got back 1,360. So you're down $40 for 4 months. And on one hand, I can say, well, that's punting. There were quite a few near misses along the way. $40 in 4 months for a $100 better isn't that bad. But I do want to be honest, I am really disappointed, especially knowing that every play I gave out, I strongly believe was plus EV. For us to be at this point in the year and for the plays that I've come up with and been able to negotiate, to not be in profit is a really, really bad result. If I ever got this opportunity to do it again, I'd be certain that I'd definitely perform better than the results have for the last 15 weeks. Now, I will actually respond to a very vocal, very minor minority, and when I say that, I think it's one guy that has multiple fake accounts, but there's a suggestion that, I give out a tip trying to lose because that will benefit Top Sport, and fair enough, if the tip loses, it does benefit Top Sport, but the suggestion that benefits me, I can assure you, is absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. To be totally frank about the arrangement that I had for the last 12 weeks with Top Sport, they gave me a flat sum of money, which was like a commitment to the next 3 months. And I used that money to buy a new computer, recording gear, editing software, because when Alex left the pod, he handled all that stuff. So I needed to have all that capability to keep it going. So it was good to get a sponsorship to cover some money towards that, so that I didn't kind of have to be out of pocket to try and get myself all set up as much. And then I can generate additional money based on the number of people that would choose to sign up to Top Sport with a tripod link or code. And that's the funny part, that if the tips for the Wide World of Punting had gone way better and gone gangbusters, I reckon more people would have joined, to be honest. So I probably did worse with generating sign-ups because the tips didn't go as well. But, nevertheless, just wanted to respond to that. But I think you guys would always know, anyone who's followed for the last, this being the 7th year knows, I'm never going to do the wrong thing by the followers. That's all I really care about is keeping you guys on board and growing the audience. And you guys make it worth, all the effort. And that's why I've been gutted to not, get better results on these tips every week. I hope that at least, while we haven't won as many as we wanted, you've gained insights into maybe a couple of new ways of thinking about how to find value in a tip. We've had these tips on UFC, rugby union internationals, golf, T20 cricket, test cricket, NBA, NFL, soccer, to name a few. And the final one is going to be on tennis. So there will be one for this episode, although I'm not going to be actually telling you the tip on the pod today. And the reason for that is because I'm going to try and give a tip that is going to take place on the weekend, so it gives you guys a bit more of a chance or an opportunity to follow along. So I'm going to pick at least 1 or 2 of the big tennis matches in the Australian Open. Other thing is, by the time we get to the weekend, depending on when you've listened to this pod, you've got more opportunity to go out and look for the tip and get on it. And also their higher profile matches, as I think by Saturday we get down to the round of 16. So what I'm going to do is actually create this market on Friday. So recording today on a Wednesday, but I'm going to create it on a Friday and release it on the Tripod Facebook page, Instagram, in our group and in our app. And that's going to allow me to look at the game Saturday, try and create a good value market, negotiate it with Top Sport and get it up on their website. And so, if you're interested in that, you can look for the play in those places. Of course, you can also just log on to the Top Sport app, and if you look under tennis, some point on Friday, the tip should be there. That's if this tip is something you're into. And the funny thing is, if this tip wins, I think we only need to win $40 in profit, and then we actually at least would be in profit for the season. And this tip, I can assure you, I'll find something that's going to stand to win more than 40. So that would somewhat negate a few of the things I've said, because there's still an opportunity to be in profit for the season. But nonetheless, I do want to say sorry for, subpar results so far. And it's up to you, obviously, if you guys want to tail that bet or not. And that's what I say, as we look forward to NRL again. It makes no difference to me at all if people follow every play that I've ever given out or if they never tail a single bet. Like, as long as you get something out of the show, you get something out of following along, you get some enjoyment or knowledge. All I do is try and give the best advice I can. What you agree with and what you do with it is totally up to you. What I do love is your feedback. I'd love to get feedback on what people thought of this series. Would you ever want me to do it again? If so, what could I do differently? What could I do better? And just to give you a heads up, I think for the first time in 12 months, next Wednesday, there's going to be no Tripod podcast in your feed or video on YouTube or Facebook. I'm going to actually not be here for the next 2 weeks as I take a step back and start to look at NRL. But 3 weeks from now will be my NRL 2021 season preview. And then from then, twice a week, NRL preview, NRL review on Wednesdays and Sundays. Massive year ahead for me. I'm going to give everything I've got. As I said a year ago, didn't know what the future held, but Alex and I would give it our best and see where it landed. And now two's become one. And, I can't really promise anything beyond this footy season, but other than my very best. So I hope that you guys will be along for the ride. Until then, take care, good luck on all your punting, and always gamble responsibly. Lego!